Hey folks, it's Brian Bledsoe once again giving you an update on the long range forecast and kind of what we can expect going forward over the next several months or so. Always pleasure to work with Red Summit. We're going to give you some good information. I think is going to help give you some plans over the next couple of months or so. We're doing an update right now, and we'll obviously do another one for October, November, that will really kind of help you hone in on exactly what type of decision making you need to do going forward. So without further ado, let's get things started and kind of see where we've been here across the western half of the country over the past 6 months. And obviously it's been a terrible go of it here across Nevada, California, Oregon, Washington, and on up here into parts of the northern Rockies. Even parts of Montana have really struggled, especially out here in the east central and southeast portion of the state and into northeastern portions of Wyoming. There are pockets where better moisture has fallen across southern Utah, Arizona, and obviously into New Mexico and West Texas. But obviously this is the big elephant in the room out here across the western U.S. That's where we've been the driest. That's where we've obviously had some terrible wildfires going on over the past several weeks or so. So that's kind of where we sit as of right now. Let's go to the next slide and show you what's going on with our El Nino or La Nina situation. This is the current status, which is essentially neutral in terms of how it looks here at the surface. These are sea surface temperature anomalies right at the surface. That last update there on September 8th. And you can see some cooler than normal water gradually starting to expand here across the surface. But if we go to the next slide, I think it's even more telling here about what's going on beneath the surface. This is where we were back in July. You saw all that orange and red shading right there, indicative of warmer than average water beneath the surface. Now, what do I mean by beneath the surface? Well, right up here is the surface of the ocean. Down there at the bottom of our graphs, down 450 meters. So the deeper this blue area takes hold, that means the stronger the chance we have of seeing this La Nina actually having some teeth and developing. And we also see some of the warmer than average water here in the western Pacific Ocean. Again, on this side of the graph, we're over off the northeast coast of Australia. Over on this side, we're just off the western coast of South America. So again, top down and basically west to east across the Pacific. This is the area that I'm focused on right here because I think that's what's going to continue to give the La Nina the teeth that it needs to actually take hold and develop over the next several months or so. So again, developing La Nina definitely in progress. If we go to the next slide, you can see what we're talking about in terms of the forecast regarding the models, all right? So where you're seeing the zero line right here, that would be neither El Nino or La Nina, even up here to about plus 0.5 or minus 0.5. That's kind of the zero area right there. But if you drop down below that, and that is what our latest models from August are doing, that is indicative that a La Nina is likely going to develop probably at least a weak event, if not a moderate event. Some of these model trends are dragging that even lower or making the central and eastern Pacific Ocean even cooler than average as we head through the heart of the winter months, which would obviously mean a stronger La Nina event. Remember, last year we had a La Nina event. Really didn't behave like a traditional one does. I do have some evidence to suggest this one could behave in a more traditional fashion than the one that we saw out there last year. I'll kind of go into more detail about that in the next video, but for the time being, this is kind of where we're sitting right now. We have a little bit of time to watch it before we jump the gun on that. But let's go to the next slide and show you what's going on basically with the models, okay? That's what a lot of us use in terms of looking down the road, see what type of forecast we're going to have, whether it's temperature or precipitation, sea surface temperature, whatever. But I'm going to show you what the NIMME model precipitation forecast looks like right here. And where you're seeing the white, that's where the model is suggesting generally average precipitation. Where you're seeing the browns, drier than average, and the green, obviously wetter than average. And there's really no tip one way or another across the majority of the country, but something I do see for the month of October is a tendency for the Pacific Northwest to start to get wetter than average, and that is a pretty typical trend in terms of a La Nina event. So that'll be something we'll be watching very closely for, to see the storm track kind of ramp up a little bit, and we'll see more frequent storms come in here into western Canada and obviously into parts of the Pacific Northwest. If we go to November's forecast, you can see that we have some dryness starting to bud out again here across Nevada, California, down through the south and southwest and on up into the plains, while parts of the Pacific Northwest and northern Rockies, again, would be average to wetter than average. Again, that would be the month for November, when that's when we really start to see the storm track invigorate and bigger storms coming off the Pacific. So that wouldn't be any big surprise to see areas the farther north you go end up wetter than average during that month. Let's go to December. And you can see it lights up pretty much the western portion of the U.S. This would be a very good thing to have actually some decent moisture here across parts of California, Oregon, on up in Nevada, Idaho, and into the northern Rockies. The farther east and southeast you go, it's drier. And again, during a La Nina event, it is that northern part of California, Nevada, and points to the north on up into the Pacific Northwest and the Northwest Rockies that would benefit the most from this type of pattern. Again, that is what the model is suggesting for December. Let's go to January. And January, unfortunately, shuts off a lot of the southern part of California, but it still keeps areas up here wetter than average in traditional La Nina fashion. The Pacific Northwest, northern Rockies, and some of that may sneak its way down here into far northern California, but definitely the farther south and southeast you go, there's a tendency for drier than average conditions to really start to hold true. Let's go to February. February, unfortunately, it's the same story here. California, most of the Southwest, drier than average versus the wetter than average conditions up here to the north, which would have been ongoing there for the past couple of months or so. And that dryness extends out here into the plains, which again is very indicative of the La Nina going forward into the back part of winter. Let's go to March. March, it's pretty much the same story. No tip one way or the other. Dry south and southwest, wetter than average across the northern tier, extending over here into the Corn Belt. Let's go to April. And April, pretty much the same story. Now again, if December hit and we had wetter than average conditions out here, that would be great. The problem is it would be 1 month, and then that would be it. We would go back to drier than average conditions. And unfortunately, during a La Nina event, a traditional La Nina event, that's what we would be in line for. And the model is seeing that. The model is forecasting a La Nina event to occur, and the model is behaving, at least in its precipitation forecast, the way a traditional La Nina event would behave. So that is one model right there, the North American Multi-Model Ensemble. Let's look at the Euro seasonal model. This is for October. And October, it really starts to light things up here across most of the West. And the seasonal change, the storm track getting active, whatnot, that would obviously be a good start to the upcoming wet season for those locations. Let's go to the next slide for November. And you can see it still drags that wetter than average bullseye down here, at least into the northern half of California, especially in the northern third and northward up the coast. Excellent news. This area is struggling mightily with drought, and that drought extends farther to the east, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But a large part of the eastern part of the country and down to the south would be average to drier than average. Let's go to December. And December keeps the wet wet and the dry starting to get drier. And you can see the dry signal setting up here across most of California, at least the southern 2/3, and extending farther east out here across Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and obviously into Colorado and parts of the Midwest, right there where the dry signal will be very stout, which is a little unusual right in that general area, at least for the month of December. Let's go to January and let's see how it changes. It kind of flips the script right there, a dry December, and then you go to a wetter than average January. But January with this model kind of lights things up here again across the West. So at least some benefit right there. And the Euro seasonal model is a little more optimistic in that regard to at least have the moisture over a more widespread area. But that's what January is looking like with this particular model. Let's go to the next one, February. And unfortunately, that dry signal pops back up here again during the month of February for California, parts of the Pacific Northwest, not in a crazy fashion like some of the computer models would, but again, we don't want to see any of that at that particular time. But there's at least a shot at that. This model in conjunction with the North American Multi-Model Ensemble kind of showing a similar type trend right there. Let's go to March. And March, wet north, dry south. Typical fashion right there as far as the La Nina goes. So I really don't see anything too terribly out of the ordinary with the way these two models are kind of projecting things going forward with this particular La Nina event. So with that in mind, if we go to the next slide, I want to show you what this other model is trying to show here. Okay, so this is the IRI multi-model probability forecast. It's another model that takes into account various models that are built in there. It's in an ensemble forecast, and it's looking for October, November, December. This is looking at precipitation. You see the yellows and the oranges. That's where it's drier than average. The green, wetter than average. You see it's really not that excited for most of the Southwest. California, average to dry, slightly drier than average during that time, but it's this next slide that really dries things out. And this is December, January, February. If this were to happen, it would just shut the door on the wet season completely out here across most of California and certainly in the desert Southwest. Now keep in mind, the farther north you go, you're going to end up doing better with this pattern. The farther south and southeast you live, live, not so much. And that's what this model is showing. Whether it's right in the intensity of that dry signal, it has the right idea with the way the pattern is likely to set up, as do those other models that I was showing you. So wet north, dry south is probably the best way to go with this particular setup, at least the way it is set up right now. Let's go to the next slide and show you, at least for the regional outlooks right here. This is for the Pacific Northwest, and that's the drought monitor overlaid there on the left-hand side for you. But drought, big issue here. Storm tracks should get increasingly active in this region, just like I showed you, and that's especially in November and December. Now, drought will likely become quite a bit less over time for this region, especially, okay? Again, the farther north you go, the better prospects you have of breaking this drought. Let's go to the next slide here. Farther south you go, well, again, you're kind of on the border here, especially for the northern third of California and Nevada. So my overall thoughts on this, at least right now, is while drought is a major issue right there, we'll probably see it lessen a little bit for northern areas while likely intensifying or remaining the same for these southern areas. And drought removal, this last statement I have down here, drought removal for the north is not necessarily a done deal. You may have some big help with that, but it's not necessarily a done deal. Let's look at some other areas here. Specifically the Intermountain West, some of the Four Corner states, again, still struggling mightily with drought. And if you live along and north of I-70, especially across Colorado, Utah, and obviously Wyoming is north of I-70, your prospects of seeing this drought lessen and possibly disappear are a lot better than areas farther south. I'm worried about Arizona again. I'm worried about New Mexico and southern Colorado again because the drought's likely going to intensify over the next several months, at least if this La Nina behaves like it likely would. Let's go to the next one. This is the southern plains, which Texas, Oklahoma, most of Kansas in pretty good shape, although drought creep is starting to show up here again across central western Kansas, down to the panhandle of Oklahoma and Texas, and back into eastern New Mexico. And again, I do think this area, the farther west and southwest you go, will probably have more of the troubles with the dryness and the increase in drought right there, or drought creep, as I like to call it here in the coming months. And let's look at a broader view right here, pretty much across the north and central part of the country. The northern Rockies, northern plains have been struggling mightily with drought now for the past several months. But as I showed you, those models are in pretty good agreement about drought being significantly reduced up here across the northern plains, as this is where the likelihood of the storm track being most active would likely set up. So while it looks bad up there right now, I would expect it to get increasingly better, especially with the seasonal change, and this is a good reason to at least be somewhat optimistic. So the last thing kind of I want to tie all this together, folks, is basically the next couple of updates are really going to be honed in not only from a model perspective, but I'll also throw in some analog years in there for you and kind of pair that up to say what we've seen in the past with this setup versus what we've seen now and where we're going forward. So look forward to that. If you have any questions, please reach out to Steve or Sean. They'll obviously put you in touch with me so we can kind of get hooked up and answer any questions that you indeed have. In the meantime, I hope you have a great rest of this month, and I'll see you again in October.